The night my father decided to narrate my life for everyone. It was my birthday. 42 guests. White tablecloths. Too much wine. And a house that always felt more like a stage than a home. He stood at the head of the table, glass raised, smile polished. "You know," he said, glancing around at his audience, "Myra has always had a creative spirit." Light laughter. I felt Nathan's hand tighten gently around mine under the table. "And while some people," he continued, gesturing vaguely toward Brenda, "focus on stability, others are still figuring things out." More laughter. Soft. Comfortable. Then he delivered it. "She'll never afford a house in this market." The room laughed fully this time. Not cruel. Just entertained. Like they'd been given a harmless punchline. I smiled. Calm. Controlled. Because in my coat pocket my fingers were touching cold metal. Keys. But that moment didn't start that night. It started 8 years earlier. The house smelled like lilies and casseroles the week Mom died. Every surface had flowers. Every conversation had a performance. Gerald, my father, received condolences like a man accepting awards. Firm handshakes. Measured nods. Stoic grief. Brenda stayed near him constantly. He kept an arm around her shoulders, as if protecting something fragile. Something valuable. No one noticed that I was the one washing dishes. The one answering the door. The one carrying trays back into the kitchen while people whispered about how strong he was. I learned something during that week. Grief has hierarchy. And I was not at the top of it. 3 months later he called it financial restructuring. We sat at the dining table. Legal folders neatly arranged. "Your mother handled the soft stuff," he said. "I handle sustainability." Brenda's graduate tuition? Covered. Her apartment deposit? Covered. Her transitional support? Covered. "And you," he said, looking at me with what he probably thought was encouragement, "need to figure yourself out." It was framed as logic. As tough love. As preparation for the real world. But it wasn't equal. It was selective. And everyone around us treated it like strategy instead of favoritism. The first crack appeared in the basement. I was looking for photo albums. Instead I found a box. Plain cardboard. Taped shut. Written in my mother's handwriting. "Helen, personal." My breath caught. It had never been opened. At least not by me. I carried it upstairs. Sat on my bedroom floor. Stared at it for almost an hour. But I didn't open it. Not yet. Some truths feel heavy even before you read them. Over the next few years I began hearing stories about myself. From relatives. From neighbors. From people who tilted their heads sympathetically when they saw me. I heard things have been hard. "We're praying for your direction." Aunt Donna once hugged me tightly and whispered, "Use the money wisely." Money? What money? 2 weeks later, I found a thank you card addressed to her in my father's office. Thanking her for supporting me. There was a check stub attached. The amount, $2,000. I had never received it. That was the moment it clicked. He wasn't misunderstanding my life. He was narrating it. Manufacturing struggle. Positioning himself as the steady father carrying the unstable daughter. Dependency is easier to control than independence. And suddenly everything made sense. The sympathy looks. The gentle tones. The carefully shaped story of Myra, the drifting one. The struggling one. The one who needs help. I didn't confront him. Not then. Because confrontation would feed the narrative. Instead, I decided something quieter. I wouldn't argue with the version of me he was selling. I would build a different one. Silently. And when it was ready, I wouldn't need to explain it. I didn't confront him. I didn't argue. I didn't send angry texts or demand explanations. I built. Quietly. The first thing I did was practical. Boring even. I enrolled in a bookkeeping certification course. Night classes. Community college. Fluorescent lighting and bad coffee. Numbers don't gossip. Numbers don't take sides. Numbers tell the truth if you're willing to look at them long enough. During the day I picked up freelance clients. Small businesses that needed help organizing their books. At night I bartended. People assume bartending is chaotic. It isn't. It's controlled. Measured. Transactional. You smile. You listen. You calculate. You leave with cash. I saved 60% of everything I made. Not because I was obsessive, because I was done being dependent. By 25, I had enough for my first property. A duplex. Nothing glamorous. Peeling paint. Outdated fixtures. A furnace that groaned like it had opinions. I qualified for an FHA loan. Low down payment. Higher paperwork. I didn't tell anyone. Not my father. Not Brenda. Not even most of my friends. I learned how to patch drywall from YouTube. I painted the walls myself. I replaced cabinet hardware one Saturday at a time. When the first tenant moved in, their rent covered most of the mortgage. By month 6, it covered all of it. I didn't announce it. I didn't post keys on social media. I just kept working. The sabotage came quietly. I found out months later that my father had called my employer, one of my larger bookkeeping clients. He framed it gently. Just concerned about her stability. He mentioned mental wellness. Suggested I was overwhelmed. HR scheduled a review. I sat in that office, hands folded, listening to a woman explain that someone had raised concerns about my reliability. I drove home afterward and sat in my car in silence. Not crying. Not screaming. Just breathing. That was the moment I understood something clearly. He wasn't confused about my independence. He was threatened by it. So I adjusted. I diversified clients. Spread risk. Never gave one person leverage again. Control the narrative? Fine. I'd control the structure. The box from the basement stayed in my closet. The one labeled in my mother's handwriting. Helen Personal. Sometimes late at night I'd take it down. Run my fingers along the taped edge. I almost opened it more than once. But I wasn't ready yet. I needed to build something strong enough to stand on before I pulled up whatever truth was inside. So I waited. At 27, I bought my second property. A small ranch house in a transitional neighborhood. Undervalued. Cosmetic damage. Solid bones. I used equity from the duplex. Refinanced strategically. No cosigners. No family assistance. No secret checks. I renovated and flipped it within 11 months. 6-figure net worth. I remember staring at my banking dashboard late one night, just letting the number sit there. No applause. No witnesses. Just me. And proof. Meanwhile, at family gatherings, I was still bartending. Still finding myself. Still the cautionary tale. Gerald would sigh in that theatrical way. She's taking her time. Relatives would nod sympathetically. Brenda would talk about promotions and stability. And I would smile. Because by then I understood something even more important. He wasn't mistaken. He was manufacturing dependency. Every retold story. Every redirected check. Every subtle comment about my instability. It wasn't concern. It was positioning. If I was always almost okay, then he could always be the rescuer. If I was always figuring things out, then he remained the architect. Thanksgiving that year confirmed it. He stood in the kitchen, wine glass in hand, telling Aunt Donna that I was struggling but resilient. Struggling, while I owned 2 properties. That was the night the strategy shifted. Not emotionally, strategically. Because I realized something simple. You don't correct a false narrative with arguments. You correct it with undeniable proximity to the truth. And I knew exactly how close I wanted that truth to land. The third property wasn't an accident. It was a decision. Maple Ridge. A quiet street lined with trimmed hedges and predictable mailboxes. The kind of neighborhood where people wave but still keep score. Number 4712. 47 steps from 4708. My father's house. I counted. Twice. The listing appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. Small cottage. Good structure. Outdated interior. Paid in full price within reach. I didn't hesitate. No financing. No partners. No announcement. Just a wire transfer and a closing date. When I held those keys, they didn't feel triumphant. They felt precise. The birthday invitation arrived 2 weeks later. Gerald was hosting. Of course he was. He loved hosting. Not because he loved gatherings but because he loved audiences. The guest list told me everything. Extended relatives. Golf friends. 2 church elders. And my former employer. That part was intentional. This wasn't a celebration. It was a stage. The night of the party, I walked through his front door slowly. Same hardwood floors. Same chandelier. Same wall of photographs near the dining room. Brenda everywhere. Graduations. Awards. Engagement party photos. Her life displayed in glossy frames. And me? One photo. 10 years old. Missing a front tooth. Frozen in childhood. As if that's where I stopped evolving. It wasn't subtle. It never was. Nathan squeezed my hand gently. You okay? He whispered. I nodded. As I was. More than okay. Dinner stretched long. Wine refilled generously. Conversations warmed. I watched him working the room, laughing, storytelling, placing hands on shoulders, positioning himself at the center of every exchange. He was building momentum. You could feel it. Like a performer timing the crowd. Eventually he tapped his glass. The room quieted immediately. That familiar authority. That sound, he joked, means you're about to hear something sentimental. Light laughter. He began with nostalgia. Different timeline, he said, smiling toward Brenda. Different paths. He spoke about responsibility, stability, smart decisions. Each sentence layered carefully. Each compliment strategic. The room leaned in. And then he pivoted. Myra, he said, turning toward me with a softened expression, has always done things her own way. Polite chuckles. She values freedom. More smiles. And while we all hope she finds her footing. Pause. Perfect timing. She'll never afford a house in this market. The room burst into laughter. Full. Comfortable. Certain. Nathan's grip tightened around mine under the table. I felt it, that old familiar pressure. The expectation to laugh along. To minimize. To stay small so the room stays comfortable. I looked around. My former employer was smiling awkwardly. Aunt Donna gave me that sympathetic tilt of the head. Brenda stared at her plate. And my father stood there satisfied. Because the narrative had landed exactly where he wanted it. Struggling daughter. Stable patriarch. Audience aligned. That's when I realized something important. Power doesn't disappear. It relocates. And mine was sitting quietly in my coat pocket. Cold metal against my fingertips. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt finished. Finished waiting. Finished allowing. Finished being positioned. The laughter began to fade naturally. He lifted his glass slightly, ready to move on to the next anecdote. That's when I reached into my pocket. Slowly. Deliberately. I stood. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Just enough for the room to register the shift. The keys felt heavier this time. Not because of what they were. But because of where they were about to land. And without raising my voice. Without changing my expression. I let them fall onto the center of the table. The sound wasn't loud. But it was sharp. Metal against wood. Clear. Unmistakable. And suddenly, no one was laughing anymore. The keys sat in the center of the table. No one touched them. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. My father looked down first. Then at me. What's this? He asked lightly, still trying to keep control of the tone. I didn't rush. That, I said calmly, is 4712 Maple Ridge. A few people frowned, confused. I continued. 47 steps from here. Silence stretched. Understanding moves slowly through a room. You can almost feel it traveling from person to person. You bought in this neighborhood? Aunt Donna asked quietly. I did. My voice didn't shake. Didn't need to. It's paid in full. That was the moment the air changed. Not dramatically. Not loudly. But physically. My former employer stopped smiling. Brenda looked up sharply. Nathan's hand relaxed in mine. My father let out a short laugh, thin, forced. Well, he said, good for you. Who helped you? There it was. The attempt to reposition. The implication that independence must have come from somewhere else. No one helped me, I replied evenly. I own 3 properties. Now the room wasn't just quiet. It was alert. A duplex I bought at 25. An equity flip at 27. And Maple Ridge. I paused just long enough. No debt. Credit score 782. The numbers landed harder than emotion ever could. My father's posture shifted. Shoulders straighter. Chin lifted. That's impressive, he said carefully. Though I do wonder how you managed that while bartending. I didn't, I said. I built a bookkeeping firm. Quietly. You could see it, the mythology cracking. The struggling daughter. The drifting one. The dependent one. It didn't match the facts sitting on the table. Before he could pivot again, a chair scraped back. Aunt Donna stood. She was holding a manila folder. Her hands weren't shaking. I think we need to clear something up, she said. The room turned toward her. She opened the folder and placed several copies of checks on the table. I sent Myra $14,200 over the years, she said, to help her through hard times. A visible ripple moved through the guests. I also have copies of every check. She looked directly at my father. They were all cashed. Another chair moved. Patricia from church. I sent $600, she said quietly, for emergency rent. Someone else spoke up. And I wired $3,000. One by one the numbers surfaced. By the time it was done, the total sat heavy in the center of the table. $18,200. Money sent in my name. Never received. The room deflated. Not loudly. Just inward. My father's face didn't flush. He didn't explode. He recalculated. This is a misunderstanding, he said. Funds were redirected for practical reasons. Household expenses. You lived here. I moved out at 22, I replied. The timeline didn't support him. Brenda's voice cut in, small but clear. You told me you paid her back. The golden child cracked. Not loudly, but enough. Doubt entered her eyes. And once doubt enters, it doesn't leave quietly. I reached into my bag slowly, pulled out the box I had finally opened. The letter inside was folded carefully, worn at the edges. My mother's handwriting covered the page. I didn't read the whole thing. Just one line. Don't let him hold you so tight that you forget how to stand. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They simply existed in the room. My father didn't argue after that. He didn't defend. He didn't raise his voice. He looked around the table, at the guests, at the checks, at the keys. And for the first time in my life, he wasn't directing the scene. He stepped away from the head of the table. No speech. No dramatic exit. Just movement. The seat remained empty. And in that space, something shifted permanently. Not revenge. Not chaos. Just truth sitting openly where performance used to be. The party didn't end. It just reshaped itself. Conversations restarted, but the tone had shifted. The laughter was softer now. More careful. People weren't leaning toward my father anymore. They were leaning away. He stood near the kitchen for a while, speaking in low tones to no one in particular. Not hosting. Not directing. Just occupying space that no longer belonged to him. Aunt Donna didn't sit back down. I'd like the money returned, she said calmly. 60 days. There was no hostility in her voice. Just clarity. Others nodded. Not aggressively. Just in agreement. Consequences don't need volume. They just need witnesses. Later that night, I stepped out onto the porch for air. Brenda followed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The porch light flickered softly above us. Inside, the sound of dishes clinking replaced what used to be admiration. I didn't know, she said finally. I know, I replied. She leaned against the railing, arms folded tight. Not defensive. Just cold. Being the favorite wasn't a gift, she said quietly. It was pressure. I just didn't realize what it cost you. That was the first honest thing she had ever said to me. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But something opened. A door that had been sealed by comparison and competition. Call me sometime, I said. And for once it didn't feel like an obligation. The ripple effects came quickly. The family group chat went silent for 3 days. Then someone changed the subject to recipes. No one responded. Thanksgiving plans were under review. Gerald's golf buddies stopped tagging him in photos. At church, conversations shortened when he approached. Reputation doesn't collapse in explosions. It erodes. Quietly. Steadily. The repayment came from his retirement accounts. I didn't ask how I knew. Word travels when control disappears. Checks were issued. $14,200 to Aunt Donna. $600 to Patricia. $3,000 wired back to another relative. $18,200. The cushion he had built his comfort on gone. There was no courtroom. No police report. Just consequence. And for someone who built his identity on control, that was loud enough. 2 months later, tenants moved into Maple Ridge. Young teachers. Kind. Grateful. Practical. They waved at him the first morning they carried in boxes. He waved back. He didn't know they were my renters. Not at first. But he figured it out. Every morning after that, when he stepped out to get the paper, he could see the house clearly. Fresh paint. New curtains. Occupied. A quiet reminder 47 steps away. Not revenge. Just proximity. I visited him once. Not to gloat. Not to reopen wounds. Just to sit. The house felt smaller somehow. The coffee was weaker than I remembered. He looked older. Not broken. Just diminished. We sat at the same dining table where narratives used to be crafted. I held on too tight, he said eventually. It wasn't an apology speech. There were no grand admissions. No dramatic self-awareness. Just a sentence. I didn't rescue him from it. I didn't soften it. I just let it exist. Because growth doesn't require humiliation. It requires reality. We didn't become a healed, cinematic family. There was no redemption arc wrapped in music. But something important had shifted. Power had rebalanced. Not through destruction. Through exposure. Not through cruelty. Through correction. I didn't take anything from him. I simply stopped allowing him to take from me. And when the dust settled, what remained wasn't victory. It was space. Space to stand. Space to build. Space to exist in the room without being narrated. The truth didn't roar. It didn't punish. It just stayed. And sometimes that's enough.